Welcome, Greek U Nations, episode number 382 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our third book is called From Letters to Leaders, Leveraging Your Fraternity or Sorority Experience to Land Your Dream Job. So go and pick up that book today on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, my son is heading off to college in the next 2 weeks for his freshman year. And I definitely want peak performance from him as a data science major so he can make a ton of money and take care of me in my old age. That got me thinking, is there something I can do as a parent of a college student to get peak performance out of him as he goes away to college? Our next guest has some thoughts on that. Veronica Karaman uses champion mindsets from sports to help unlock people's potential. She believes there is a champion in everyone, and it's her joy and passion to connect people to their true champion identity and then equip them through her signature system, which she calls the Champion's Way. Whether it is in sports, mainly golf, academics, personal leadership, or basic life coaching, people often get results beyond their expectations in record time. Welcome to the show, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm delighted to be here.
It is an honor to have you on the show. I can't wait to talk to you a little bit about golf and, of course, college students. Now, you decided on Duke University for your undergraduate experience, and I'm sure that you had many options in terms of colleges to go to. So what made you choose Duke?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I always answer that by saying I didn't choose Duke. Duke chose me. And it was a very difficult time in my life. My father had passed away when I was 15. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was just going to stay home and go to Duquesne University. And at the time, I had this crush on a guy that was playing the Australian Golf Tour, and he came back and he called me up one day and he disguised himself as the golf coach from Georgia Tech. And I really thought it was my friend Bob, and I could have killed him when I found out he was just messing with me. Well, the very next week, I get a call from the athletic director from Duke, Carl James, and I was like, Bob, cut it out. And it really was the athletic director from Duke. And I really knew nothing about Duke. And so the first 3 phone calls, I totally turned him down. I said, I don't want to leave my mom, home alone. I really can't leave college. And the 4th phone call, he called me up and he said, look, let me just send you an application. And I said, well, I'm graduating early from high school and I'm going to go to Florida with my cousin, and I'll stop and look at the school in North Carolina when on my way back. And I did. And of course, my eyes were opened and I realized what a fool I was to refuse that first phone call. But it really was interesting to look back, and I really considered it a matter of divine providence when I was thinking at one level and my Heavenly Father above was thinking at a whole different level. So that's how I got to Duke. And I didn't really realize, and I tell high school students this all the time, that I was paying my way to a full scholarship to one of the greatest universities ever just by being an excellent student and an excellent athlete. I didn't know that, but just by pursuing that excellence, I was setting myself up for something beyond my expectations.
That's a great story. And it certainly is a lesson in persistence because that coach wasn't going to take no for an answer.
He wasn't, man. And I'm so glad he had persistence because, you do your best when you're a kid and you don't have mentorship or someone guiding you. And so I'm very grateful that he was persistent.
That's a great story. And your professional golf career highlight was playing in the Women's U.S. Open. You won the Tennessee Senior Women's Open Championship. Tell us a little bit about your journey through professional golf.
Thank you. I probably could spend all day on that, but when you ask me that question, I think of the moment when I decided to pursue my dream. And I had just graduated from Duke, and I was sitting in um, a a meeting with a prospective corporate employer. And after we had gone back and forth, and he was interviewing me for a while, he finally looked at me and he said, "Look, what is it you really want to do?" Because he saw like I wasn't really being engaged, and I said, "I want to go pursue my dream of being a professional golfer." And he said to me, "Well, then go do it." And so that was, a real step of faith to step out and pursue a dream. And I didn't really know how to pursue a sponsor. But Tom Butters was the athletic director at Duke at the time. And for 4 years, I tried to get in and, speak with him and couldn't do it. But I decided to just jump in my car and drive to Duke and see if he could give me some advice. And he was in. So I walked in his office. I said, "Mr. Butters, can you give me some advice on, finding a sponsor?" And he said, "Yes." And he was like, "Don't ask a lot of people for, you know, certain amounts of money. Just keep asking until you could find one sponsor to give you the whole shebang." And I said, "Do you know of anyone?" And he said, "Yes." And anyways, I remember one day I just jumped in my car and I said, "I'm going to go find this man and ask him to sponsor me." And it was, a gutsy thing to do, just to not know, but just go. And I asked him, and within 5 minutes, he said yes. And I was like, "You said yes?" I'm saying. So that was the beginnings, and I got in my car, and this was when the mini tour for women's professional golf was just beginning in Florida. And so I went down and I played for a year, and it's a grind. It's not an easy life. I call golf a miserable, wonderful experience because there are so many aspects of being on the tour that are fabulous, and then there are other aspects where it's difficult, and it goes up and down. And so I played on various tours, and I got really sick. I almost collapsed in a tournament when I was out in Manhattan, Kansas in 1988, and I had never withdrawn from a tournament before, but I withdrew and came down with chronic fatigue. And back in the day, they hadn't even labeled it yet. So here I am out playing on the tour, pursuing this dream, and I can't lift my head off a pillow. It took months to like walk again. And I, being a woman of faith, I just kept praying, and I just kept hearing this voice say to me, "Just go for it." And it was the only thing I could go for that year. And so I said, "I got to fight. I got to fight." And anyways, it's a beautiful story, but I kept putting one foot in front of the other. And my first tournament in a year, I shoot 5 birdies, win the US Open qualifier, shoot 71 and off to the US Open. And it was just really remarkable because I realized we have so much more power in us than we think. And I often, tell students, and particularly my players, I'm like, own your space. You take charge of your life. You be responsible for your choices. And I often say we always have 3 voices that are speaking to us all the time. The critic, that tells us why we can't do something and puts us down. The coach, which opens up our mind to a new possibility, which is what I think college is a lot about, opening up your mind to new possibilities. But then the champion voice. And that is the least recognizable, but the one that needs to be the strongest, the most, because you can never get to your potential from your critic. And so the champion voice is the one that says, "I can, I will, I believe, I'll step out." And ultimately, I believe the force voice, the voice from above. But to really encourage people to stand back and say, what do I want my college experience to be like? What would success be? How can I make a contribution? And also, like, for me, being at Duke, I had played golf my whole life. And even though I was an excellent student, I really didn't even know that I had other gifts and talents. And it was my first public speaking class, like the one everybody's afraid to speak. And I got through with my talk, and everyone in the class and the professor looked at me and he said, "You could have a career in public speaking." And I was floored because I didn't know that there were other parts of me that were gifts and talents that if I just pursued them, I could form a career. And basically, in many ways, I have. And so I always encourage, college students, pursue your dreams, but recognize and discover your passions and your gifts, because that's what's going to carry you through the long haul, regardless of what you pursue.
Wow, that's fantastic that you've got so many talents at your disposal. I mean, we do have a lot of athletes that listen to our show all the time. I think, the majority of them are just student leaders in college organizations. They belong to things like fraternities and sororities, for example. But just like you said, I mean, you believe that there's a champion in everyone. You talked about the champion's voice. And you also have the champion's way. I see the book behind you. Can you explain to us in more detail what is the champion's way? And is that the same as the champion's voice?
Well, that's a great question. The Champions Way came about as a result of my having an experience on the professional golf tour.
Mhm.
And I was trying to make a comeback in golf, and I had gotten a sponsor. This was like when I was about 40.
Mhm.
And my goal was to qualify for the US Open. In 6 months, I hadn't played competitively for years. And even though I went from shooting like 80 to 69 in 6 months, I didn't qualify. And it was like Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and couldn't get back up again. And it was very devastating to me emotionally. And a lot of athletes experience this. You give everything to something and it doesn't happen. And then what happens? And so at the time, I had a mental game coach for a while. And this was just kind of at the beginning when mental game coaches were coming forth. And he said, "Veronica, you made the mistake of pursuing results oriented goals versus process oriented goals." And here I was, a professional golfer for years, and nobody had ever explained to me that the way I looked at something determined my reality. And so he said, if you are focusing everything on an event, then what happens after that event? Nothing. And so he opened up my eyes to help me see that process oriented goals, which is what you have to do to get to the result, was a much healthier way of pursuing peak performance. And so I further learned from a wonderful world-class trainer, Dr. James Lower, how peak performance happens. And he said that peak performance happens by being fully engaged. To be fully engaged is to be physically energized, mentally focused, emotionally connected, and spiritually aligned. So just think of 4 railroad tracks, and you have the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual lanes to your highway. Find a process in each one of those, I call them champion zones, and do them concurrently, and that's when you take a leap. And I've seen it over and over and over again, this framework of thought, a holistic framework of thought, that if you can get a competitor's eyes or an achiever off of just the goal and onto what do I need to do and do them concurrently. Like, what good is it? Let's say if you have great, I'll do it academics, great study skills, but you procrastinate. Are you going to have a peak performance? No. And so you help someone identify what those processes are from the start, right where they're at. And so you're creating success from the start. So I wrote this book, The Champion's Way, Core Foundations for Achieving Peak Performance in Sports and Life, to lay out this very simple framework that to me is the complete picture of peak performance that you can apply to any goal setting and achieving. But it's the way to go about achieving the best results from a place of what I call wholeness. Because particularly like going to school like Duke, okay, you think Duke's a great school. Well, it is. Well, let me tell you, it's also a high pressure school.
Right.
Like, you have to perform. When I was playing for the girls golf team, we didn't get cut any slack. So I remember I was a straight A student and I made my first C in calculus because I missed 6 classes because we were out playing a tournament. Well, I thought my life was over, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, it's like you have to manage, have some self mastery. But if you know how to look at something to create the results that you want from the start, from a process place, then you are in a much better place to achieve that, and to achieve it from a place of wholeness. Because I can't tell you how many students I've coached, at a place like Duke, where they're crashing and burning because they fall under the pressure because they don't know how to manage their time, their sleep, their work. And so that's what I do. I help particularly younger, aspiring athletes, mainly junior golfers, but I can work with any sport, college players, aspiring pros, to get this, what I call operating system, instilled in them so that they can go about their way with the greatest potential for success.
I
And,
like that.
and as you know, all leadership, all leadership starts from self-leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, I
How
really
can
like
I
that.
lead, how can I lead you if I don't know how to lead me?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think one of the greatest traits of self-leadership, and you know this, begins with self-awareness. Self-awareness begins with the ability to non-judgmentally observe your thoughts, right? And then you can choose, is that thought serving me? If not, what thought do I want to think? And to be able to teach that to a teenager, you've set them up for life. Because in our society, we're so used to being affected by the culture around us. But a true champion, creates her own reality, has his or her own vision, and goes about creating that reality, regardless of what anybody else thinks.
Mhm. Mhm. All right, so let's talk a little bit about parents because I think they are a part of the champion's way. You believe
Or
that
or not the
or
champion's
not
way.
the champion's way, right? It could be the opposite as well,
Yeah.
depending on how they react. So, you believe that the parent-child relationship actually does play a big role in an athlete's performance. So, how can we work on that relationship with our child in order to get peak performance?
That's a great question. And I'll give you an example of a great parent. Uh, I'm working with a player now. He's a senior in high school.
Mhm.
And his parents just sent him to Africa to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, he's comes from a very good, upper middle class family. He got really sick during the trip, and he climbed, took him a week, Mount Kilimanjaro, sick as a dog, throwing up every day. I mean, he came back and he said, Coach Veronica, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I called his mom up. I said, I'm so proud of you. I'm so just proud that you sent your son on this trip that would give him an experience to set him up for his life. And she goes, that's why I did it. Um, and so it was the trip of a lifetime, but he also found grit inside of himself, right? That he never knew he had. So compare that to a parent who is so over involved emotionally and every other way, let's just say in the kid's game, that I've seen this over and over again. Like, even after he hits a shot in a tournament, the parents like, well, why did you do that there? And I'm going nuts, because to really develop, let's say, a champion, you have to let them own their own space. So if you are emotionally over involved, there's so much room in the container. So if you're owning that space, how can the kid own it? I had a parent recently, I got to the golf course and she asked me to leave the course. I was like, what? It's going to put too much pressure on my son. I honored her request, but I also knew, you're not helping your son because you are trying to control the very environment that he needs to control, which isn't even from the outside, it's from within. So, that's an example. So parenting is a lot of this. It's the discipline, it's like the oversight, but coaching is this. So if a parent, particularly in sports, can pull back emotionally and just look at that child and come from a place of empowerment and encouragement, and I call it speaking the truth in love, because that you have to know that you're loved, but you also have to shoot straight with what is the process, what is the practice they're doing, and help hold them accountable to it. Like I had a mom recently leave the golf course because her son was acting up, and he was kind of quitting and getting into the moping, and she goes, I can't take it. And I wanted to say to her, listen, this isn't about you, it's about him. Now, if that was me, when he got off the course, I would have looked at him straight in the face and say, you are a champion. I don't ever want to see you quitting again. If you do, I'm going to smack you upside your head. That's not who you are. See, I've had to learn to do that because a lot of my clients are 15 to 17-year-old boys,
Mm-hmm.
But see, that's what they need. They need, I call it placing a demand on your inner champion. So a true champion doesn't need anybody to do that. They place their own demand on themselves. But a lot of times you can form that in someone by placing the demand on them, but they have to own it. Like this wonderful player that went to Mount Kilimanjaro, I said, listen, you've just proved that you have more grit than probably any other boy out on this tour. How are you going to apply that to your golf now? So what's your goal? And he was like, it was like 70% of what I knew we could do. I said, you just climb Mount Kilimanjaro, totally sick, and you're going to be settled for A's and B's? That's not your potential. I said, why don't you go for that A in Latin? That might be climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in your academics, but you already have the grit to do it. So I had to challenge him, and he responded. So that's how you have to take them to the edge of the potential, because that's where it's released, on the edge. And so a true champion isn't afraid to go to the edge, but you can take them there and support them in it.
Great advice. I can tell you're very spiritual as well. So how does competition and spirituality now mix in order to reach your full potential?
Thank you for asking that question, because this is my real joy and passion. And I just wrote a book called God Make Me a Champion, An Athlete's Journey of Faith into the Power of Surrender. And, I was brought up a good little Catholic girl, right? And when I was in these like national peewee putting contests, I'd pray to win those things every night. And then you get older, and it's like you have a faith over here in God, and then you love to compete, but then the two never integrate. And so I began to see that a lot of my players were the same place. Like they had a faith and they loved to compete, but they didn't know how to integrate it. And so I teach them how to, one, you think about this, what causes fear and anxiety in a player or competitor? The need to control outcomes. But if God is in charge of your life and you believe he has a plan for you, you don't have to control the outcome. You can release it. So if you go into a competition or even go into your school year and release the need to control an outcome to God, like give it to him through prayer, then you're free. If you pray, I always say, even in an assignment, pray it through. And I don't mean just like everybody prays when they're in the test. They don't know the answer, right? Concept, process, and outcome through it all. And this is what was so profound to me, because I realized that while the teacher was teaching me, the teacher was teaching me. And it was profound to me because the greatest experience I've ever had in my life have been with God on the golf course. And I got to the US Open through my faith in that voice. I've quit golf so many times and it came back to me. I won my first senior championship 5 years ago by 13 shots. And I did it the second day. I just kind of backed into it. I just decided to spend some time worshiping God with my music. And it so got me into a state that when I got to the golf course, I didn't have any thoughts. My mind was still. I saw a shot and hit it. It was so profound to me that in the integration of my spiritual disciplines with my athletic disciplines, that I could perform even better. And I think a big part of this is just even believing that God desires to be in the game with you.
Very cool. I like that. Very nicely said. Now, I want to ask you something because the college year is about to begin. Okay. We're about to go into the fall semester. Students are preparing to go away to college in 2 weeks. They're going to start their classes. So, if you were to give advice to a college student on how to create a successful college year this upcoming year, what advice would you give them?
Great question. I love your questions. Okay. So I thought about this. So
Yeah.
if you just take the Champions Way, the grid,
Right.
4 champion zones: physical, get, sound, sleep.
Okay.
It'll help your brain, it'll help you function. Sound sleep, make it a priority. Number 2, and this is so simple, but it's profound: do your work on time. Don't procrastinate. Like in golf, there's no procrastination. Why? Because you have to hit the shot once you get to it. Back in academics, you got to set up your shots. So schedule out everything. If you have a paper to write and it's due in 2 weeks, chapter 1, chapter 2, page 1, map it out. When you get the elephant out of your head, the pressure goes because you can see what you have to do. This is how I made straight A's through 2 master's programs. Map it out. Number 3, I would say join a community. Have a sense of belonging somewhere. Whether it's a sorority or a fraternity or a spiritual community, some place where you are safe emotionally to receive support. I didn't have that when I went to Duke. And so I hid behind being a great athlete. But my soul was starved of relationships. Now I made up for it in grad school, but it's so important. And number 4, decide to make a contribution, because your passions come from service. So don't see learning as just something that's being given to you, but learning is communal. Like I always say, every student is a teacher. So contribute to that professor's field of knowledge. Like, don't be afraid to have an original thought. And I think finally, I would say, determine what your values are. Write out 5 values. Like my highest value is integrity. So that shapes a lot of my decisions. Am I walking in integrity with who I am? And I would say for any college student, like we in college, like you have this freedom, what you think is freedom, like to do whatever you want, but that's not freedom. Freedom is the ability to make the right choice, to do the right thing. So write down 25 things you're not going to do in college. I'm not going to put myself in a place of, let's just say, sexual temptation. Decide beforehand who you're going to be, how you're going to go through college. You can decide beforehand. I'm not going to fear. I can't tell you how many times I had to pull back, observe my own emotions, and make a decision. That's not how I'm going through this challenge in my life.
Wow.
And I would say, be a seeker of truth. Because I remember it was my sophomore year of college. College is a time when you start thinking, well, what do I believe for myself? Do I believe what I believe in, let's say spiritually, because my parents passed it down to me, or what's the truth? So as those things come bubbling up, don't be afraid to wrestle with those things, because college is such an amazing time of forming your own individuality and your own sense of self. And I would just say honor that in yourself, and don't allow the culture to rob you of your champion spirit and identity, because in many ways college to me is a war zone. Like, you can go in a lot of different directions, right? But you decide that you're going to be a champion, that you're going to go through it, and you're going to make that experience the best of what it could be for you.
I love it. Veronica, the champion's way. This has been so, so good. Now, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And I know you're hanging out in Orlando, Florida all the time. Where should I go for a great meal the next time I'm in Orlando?
Well, that's a great question, but I have to say I'm no longer in Orlando. I'm in
Oh,
North Carolina.
you moved.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have to update my website. But I was thinking about that. But
Yeah.
I'm in Pinehurst.
Yeah.
But if you ever come to this area, there's a great little health food store called Nature's Own. And they have the best tasting food. Like, they have a little food bar.
Uh-huh.
And there's so many times I'll go in there and you can get a great lunch, like a chicken wrap or a tuna wrap, like healthy stuff,
Uh-huh.
for $4.75. So I would say if you come to this area, check out Nature's Own.
Nature Zone. Now I got to go to North Carolina and check it out. Healthy food for under $5. I'm in.
Yep,
Let's go.
yep.
That's the
And
deal
it
right
works for a senior citizen too.
there. All right. So, if our listeners, if they want to pick up your books, you got a couple of books there in the background, they want to take your courses, or maybe invite you to come and speak on their college campus, where should they go to connect with you?
My website is truechampionacademy.com, truechampionacademy.com. And that is a site where I house my 12 module video series of the Champion's Way, that I take all my players through. So you can get that as a self-study. You can hire me to coach you one-on-one. You can reach out to me there through email if you would like for me to come speak to your campus. The books, The Champion's Way, God Make Me a Champion, the other books are available on Amazon. And there's a few books on my website that's a digital download. The Champion's Way is one of them. The other digital download that I would highly recommend for any faith-based students is a whole curriculum I wrote called God's Way to an A, really how to integrate your faith and learning. I've probably trained close to 10,000 students in that, off the charts, in terms of uh, the transformation that it brings in your life, and that's on there too. So I
Wow.
hope you'll find some resources for your empowerment there.
That's just a wealth of information. Thank you so much, Veronica, for
You're welcome.
sharing your expertise, sharing all of these resources with our college students. As you know, having a mentor is really key in all of this. And the fact that you're opening yourself up and saying, hey, I'm here to help, I think is just a wonderful thing, especially when college students so often just look at their buddy, somebody their own age, to act as a mentor to bounce things off of. And I'm like, hey, there's so many mentors out here who've been there and done that can help shortcut you to success. Just go out and reach out to them. They'd be more than happy to help you. So
Yes,
I really appreciate it, Veronica. I do.
my pleasure. And something I just started that I'll share with your audience. I just started it last night. We started Sunday nights, but for athletes who would like prayer for your performance, I'm starting an online fellowship. So you can go on truechampionacademy.com and reach out to me. And, I'd love to invite you to that time of fellowship and prayer. So that's it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Veronica, make sure that you like it on social media. Make sure that you share it with other college students that could benefit from all of her courses and all of her books. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.